Welcome to Celluloid Citizens, a podcast about film. I'm Sean M. Thompson.
And I'm Brian O'Connell.
And on this, our inaugural episode, we will be discussing the 2019 French film Portrait of a Lady on Fire, directed by Céline Sciamma.
I think so. Sciamma.
And written by Céline Sciamma and starring Naomi Merlant and Adele Haenel, and the cinematographer was Claire Mathon. I probably mispronounced all of that. I'm sorry.
Well, French. This, maybe a brief synopsis before we get in. This film is about Marianne, a painter at the end of the 18th century in Brittany, who is invited to, I should say commissioned, to paint a wedding portrait of Eloise for her lover, or betrothed. And spoiler alert, just kind of blanket spoiler alert for the whole episode, the two of them fall in love with each other.
They do, and it's a beautiful romance. It's I guess you'd call it, melancholy romance. Not necessarily tragic.
No, I wouldn't say tragic.
It's on the fringes. It's close to it, but
it's sad, certainly.
It is definitely sad.
And I would say often painful, especially toward the latter end of it, but not. I wouldn't. Tragedy seems like you would associate it with death or tremendous loss, and that isn't really...
It's more just unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a product of its time. It goes into how basically a lesbian relationship, you couldn't do it.
Yeah, and other forms of the oppression of women during this time period, which...
Yeah, that's true. I wasn't expecting... I knew it was going to be a love story. I didn't expect, and again, full spoilers, there's
an abortion plot.
Yeah, there's a maid, and she gets pregnant, and so one of the subplots is when Heloise's mother, who owns the house and hires the painter and the housekeeper, when she leaves for a couple of days, the maid reveals that she's pregnant, and it's been what did she say, 3 weeks? I don't remember.
I think 3 months where she...
3 months, yeah, that's right. It was even longer.
Yeah, where she just hasn't, menstruated, so she's pregnant.
Yeah, and we get this whole subplot about what it was like to get an abortion in the 18th century, which, just horrifying all around.
But it wasn't... It was... So, here's one of the interesting concepts of the film to me, and it's kind of... It's something Have you read Carmen Maria Machado's new memoir?
I haven't. No, I want to.
Well, it's great, first off, but it's this description of an abusive relationship she was in with another woman, but a large part of it is about how there aren't accounts of this happening in the past because it's been erased from the archive. She calls it violence of the archive, in the sense that the lives of lesbian women, and in this film as well, abortion, just aren't represented in the historical canon.
No, that's true when you think about it, actually. You get the really... about the really gruesome stuff,
yes.
If you just were studying medicine, for instance, they would go into that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, in terms of personal accounts, you probably don't get a lot because A, I'm sure a lot of those women might have died. And B, even if they didn't, we have a hard enough time hanging on to female authors of the past just in general.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well,
so let alone, female issues.
Well, so one of the things I think this film did really well was because, so of course abortions and gay relationships were happening in the past. They did exist. But since they they exist outside of the official record, I guess, of events. You have to kind of look between the pages of history, as it were. And I think one of the scenes in this film that exemplifies it so well is the scene where Marianne paints an image of the abortion with Eloise and the maid posing.
She does, and it's a really interesting scene, yeah, because it's kind of, it's been a couple hours since this maid has drank this whatever, some kind of herb, I guess.
Yeah.
And she's definitely like feeling not great, as she would. And she's laying down, and then this Marianne decides, oh no, wait, hold on, go over there, and she stages them to sort of have the
image of the abortion.
Painting. Yeah, which is, it's fascinating, really.
Because
there's also, it's...
You get the sense when she's doing this painting that she's documenting an experience that, women have always had across history, but has never been, represented in a way that I was reading some interview with the director, and she was talking about how there isn't like, a museum of abortion history or something like that.
That's true.
And that there isn't like a representation of something that's been so fundamental to women's lives across history.
I mean, it's still such a taboo subject, and it's still so hotly debated, and there's still, there are still places, states, where you can't even have it happen. So, but that's one of the more interesting parts of the film as well is when she first gets there, Marianne is told that Heloise just won't stay for a portrait. Like if you go at her like that, like, hey, just sit here, I'm going to paint you, she just won't do it. So initially what Marianne has to do is basically just pretend like she's here to accompany her on walks and just be like a hired friend, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so she first starts putting together the image of her by kind of like hanging out with her and then like sketching her face and doing all of this kind of off of that. And when she first reveals the painting to Heloise looks at it and she's like, that's not me.
Yeah, because she's just following the conventions that have already been laid out for her.
By this point, you can tell Marianne's developing feelings for Heloise, and Heloise just kind of real viciously is like, yeah, that's a terrible painting, you suck.
But so one of the things I guess as a more genre-oriented fan enjoyed, especially about the first half of the movie, is that it's kind of almost like weirdly tense, if that makes sense.
No, it is. It's when the
in an almost like gothic way that she's like going to this like forbidding old house and the sister has killed herself.
Isolated island and the sister has killed herself. And one of the first, actually, I think one of the first or the very first time that Marianne meets Heloise to go outside, Heloise just like runs full tilt towards this cliff, and it's already been established that her sister died from, I want to say, falling off the cliff.
Leaping off
the cliff.
It's never verified.
You get the sense she killed herself.
Yeah, out of dread of this.
But yeah, and then so Marianne obviously runs after her, and what happens though is right before she's going to fall off, Heloise stops, and then she turns, and she's like, I just wanted to run, and that's kind of a good character portrayal of who this woman is. She's very, I hesitate to say free-spirited, because it's kind of hard to be that back in 18th century Brittany, I got the sense, but as much as you could be.
Yeah, well. So the thing, I mean, if you want to talk about the differences between Marianne and Eloise, Marianne kind of has more freedom in a paradoxical way, in that she isn't being forced to marry anyone, and she can take over her father's business, is what she says at one point.
Yeah.
But, Eloise is the one who is actually being forced to do something that she desperately doesn't want to do. And yet she has more of a defiant air about her as a result that you see across the film.
It's true, yeah.
It's just kind of interesting dynamic.
It's an interesting dichotomy where the one person who acts like they have less power and acts maybe a little more timid and reserved is actually the one with more power, and the one who acts like they have more power is actually the one with the least, who is, getting married off and is not really thrilled about it.
And there's that great scene. I think it's really the only real argument they have is that when they receive news that Eloise's mother is returning, Marianne wants her to resist in some way. Like you have to fight this in some way, and Eloise is basically like, how can I fight? How do you expect me to resist this thing that's being imposed on me? And that's like a real like a realization for Marianne, I think, in that this person is being subjected to constraints that she has no understanding of, and that she's actually been complicit in enforcing by painting the portrait.
Yeah, because like the not the very opening of the film, but when we get into because it's first it starts in an art studio, and it's Marianne, and she's like an art teacher now, and she's getting painted, but then it cuts to most of the film is in flashback, I guess. And she's on this boat heading towards this island. And so even from the beginning, there's this sense that Marianne has more agency because she can leave the island if she wants. And it's kind of like Eloise can't leave until a man takes her. And that's also, I guess, that's like sort of a Gothic convention too, like the person trapped on the island or in the castle. Or
I mean, the whole mood during the opening scenes is kind of almost, I wouldn't say eerie, but the mom is saying, oh yeah, I had to like keep her in the house and not let her out because she's gonna, do something terrible. She's gonna wind up like her sister if I let her out without a companion. And then when the first thing we really see of Eloise at all is this great shot that's moving down the staircase, and she's just cloaked in black, and like her face is hidden, and it feels very like...
It is very Gothic, yeah. It feels very otherworldly.
Yeah. And then obviously at the end, Eloise's fate looks rather bleak. I mean, we only get a few hints, but we see that portrait of her in the gallery with a child.
Yes, that's right. She has one portrait, and she's, clearly had children because she's with a child, but she's got this book that she had when she was in the height of the love affair with Marianne. And before they kind of parted, Eloise said, "Can I have a picture of you, Marianne?" So she opens the book to a certain chapter and like draws this picture of herself like in the nude. And then in the painting, you see that she has the same book, and it's open. You can see the page number, and it's the page where the portrait is.
Well, that I think that goes back a little bit to what we were talking earlier, in the sense that these types of love affairs are lost to history because there's no record.
Yeah, there's no record, so you don't know. I mean, it might have been I'm sure it was a very common thing.
But there are little traces of them, in whether it be in like paintings or literature, where you can kind of see hints of these things occurring. And really that's what historians of queerness and homosexuality have to do, is kind of infer a little bit, and I thought the page being left open to 28 is like a little clue, and the type of thing that people would have to pick up on. And I thought that was a really deft touch on the writer-director's part.
It was. And then the only other set in the present indication is, and it's one of my favorite shots of the film, but it is definitely I think the saddest thing, is Marianne explains that she went, I believe it's the orchestra, and earlier in the film she's been talking about the orchestra with Eloise, and it also gets into, who has more power and agency. Marianne says, oh, I've been to the orchestra and it was so great, and Eloise is like, oh, I've never gone, I'd love to go someday. And then the very end is Marianne going by herself to this orchestra, and she notices across the way that Eloise is there, and she's also alone. And we just get this shot where it like kind of slowly, so it's the slow zoom on Eloise, and as she's hearing the orchestra for the first time, and the actress does a really good job, because from what I've gathered, it's very hard to A, act without speaking, and B, go through like a really wide range of emotions really quickly and have it seem authentic. And she does both of those things like really deftly. Like it's like she's initially, you can tell she's like just
it's kind of gutting to watch it. It's very like it's so painful, because you're reliving the whole thing with her, I feel, because she starts off like kind of laughing almost or smiling in like this reflection, and by the end she's just in tears, and obviously we know what she's thinking about, because this is the same piece of music that Marianne played for her earlier in the film.
Yeah, and you just see like her entire world fall apart within the space of like a minute. And as I forget who said this, but I think I was listening to Weird Studies, and they were talking about Under the Skin, which is also awesome film. I'd love to cover that at some point. But they talk about how John Glazer has this shot of Scarlett Johansson in that where it's just like she's like staring into a mirror, but it's like a full minute, and like in film a full minute is like a half hour. So yeah, when it's like you're really holding on someone and you don't have any cut or any kind of change of camera movement or anything, like it is, you're just there for it. So whatever that person's feeling, whether it's under the skin, she feels like, you get the sense she's just like this cold, like alien type on feeling. But in this case, you just get the sense this woman is just completely broken.
Yeah. Have you seen Call Me by Your Name?
I haven't yet. I saw that was the same director that did Suspiria, right?
Indeed, it was.
I haven't seen Call Me by Your Name yet. I like Suspiria, 2018 one, obviously.
I do too, but fair warning, mild spoilers for a movie that's been out for 3 years at this point. But it's the ending of Call Me by Your Name features I think a 1 or 2 minute shot of a character weeping in front of a fireplace, reflecting on the romance that they had experienced over the course of the film. And I thought this almost rhymed with that in a really, because both are very prominent queer romance movies that have come out in the past 10 years.
Oh, absolutely.
And they both end on this really resounding note of bittersweet, reflection on what could have been or whatever. And I don't know, it just felt like an interesting, almost response to it, I guess.
No, that does make sense. And also, you have to remember, when you're watching a period piece, it's not always about the period. A lot of the time, the best period pieces are kind of riffing off modern times and the sensibility of the time. So when you're watching a Call Me by Your Name, or in this case, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, what you're really getting is this
contemporary reflection,
contemporary view of it. Yeah, I hesitate to say revisionist, because it isn't.
No.
I think it's not meant to be that. But it is very much we're at a certain place with gay rights, and, people identifying with their sexuality. And like, so when you go and watch a film like this, it's kind of like a direct response to the current climate.
Yeah, but one of the things that struck me, and it is really a very deeply feminist film. I don't think anyone would dispute that.
It is. Oh yeah.
But it isn't didactic, for one. And it isn't really the type of empowerment story, I guess, that has been, popularized in the past few years.
Oh yeah, there's nothing really all that. I mean, I guess you could say that Marianne, as stated before, has some agency. It's, obviously she does okay afterwards. She's clearly still heartbroken, but she, is like teaching some art class and, like...
But her paintings still have to be listed in her father's name at the gallery showing.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, that is historically accurate too, though. Like, back in the day, women that wanted to write would often have to write under male names, and if they wanted to have their paintings in a gallery, they'd have to write or put a man's name or go under their dad or their brother's name.
But as a counterpoint to that more, I guess, traditional type of feminist narrative that we see in film in the past few years, I think one of the really remarkable things is the space the movie gives these women in the middle portion when Eloise's mother has left, to just kind of to exist with each other in a way that's not judgmental or expectational, and if that's a word, in any way.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think part of the reason that the romance resonates so much and you get a sense of like an actual infatuation is the movie takes its time, and, it's not like you get hints, but it's not like right when they meet each other, they're, hugging and kissing. It's like there's many, many days that go by before they even start to attempt to explore their feelings for each other. And even then, like they share a kiss on the beach, and it's like Eloise runs away and Marianne's just like kind of weeping. And so the film takes its time, is what I'm saying.
Yes. I mean, that's something really of paramount importance in a romance like this. One of the things I thought they did really well I think the conceit of her having to secretly observe Marianne in order to paint her initially is really brilliant from a storytelling perspective, because it kind of encourages the audience to watch Eloise in the way that Marianne has to watch her. Because when it's a close-up of Eloise in the first half of the film, it's not just a close-up of a character. You're being encouraged to like fully absorb the details of her face and her her posture and everything as Marianne is. And that, I think, is really a great conceit for a romance, in any form.
It is. I wanted to go into the cinematography, because we've kind of mentioned the acting and the plot, but the cinematography is like one of the big stars of this film, because it does this interesting thing. I'm sure it's been done in other films about art before, but, it's about a painting, but then all these shots look like a painting. Like, it's like all of these landscapes and all of these close-ups. It's like, so there's so many shots in the film that kind of mirror a painting like as it is.
Just the poise of the characters and the way they're positioned, like, lots of profile shots and the beautiful, beautiful scenery on that beach. Oh my god, blew me away. It was painterly. I don't know.
It was, yeah. Actually, my favorite, which isn't surprising, but one of my favorite shots and favorite scenes is when they go to this, I'll admit, I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but it was some kind of party with all these women, like kind of further down on the beach.
Yeah, with the bonfire.
Yeah, there's a bonfire, and they have this kind of bop where they kind of a cappella group into which was really cool. It's just this kind of chanting song.
It's, very it was kind of a surprising, spontaneous moment when that happened.
It was, because there's not a ton of...
there's no music.
Yeah, there's not that much music. Like, it's mostly ambient noise, I think.
I think other than that song, it is literally just the classical music.
The orchestra at the end, yeah.
Yeah.
The title of the film comes from this scene because there's this bonfire, and it's like Marianne is just kind of staring at Eloise through the fire, and just like you can tell she's like passionately in love with her. But Eloise is standing a little too close to the fire, and her dress like literally catches on fire. And she just does, like, for a few moments, she just does nothing. She just kind of stares at Marianne.
And she walks a little bit, and it's like...
In the very beginning of the film, we see a painting that is literally, that scene. And it's like she's kind of just changed it to, like, on the beach or something. It's, like, a very powerful image.
Mm.
It's very surrealist, yeah, because, like...
It's almost surreal when it happens.
Because if you've watched enough film, you realize at that point, you're like, is this really happening, or is this a subjective thing where Marianne is just kind of seeing her in this way? But you realize in a few seconds, no, it's real, because like a woman comes over and like tackles her to like put her out. She's literally on fire. But
she is literally on fire. But speaking of surreal elements, there's also, and I loved these shots as well, Marianne walking around the hallways at night, and this image of Eloise just keeps appearing in darkened doorways.
I think part of that is explained that they took some sort of hallucinogen.
Yeah.
That's one part, at least.
But there are a few parts where it's not in the wake of a hallucinogen scene, and she's just... I guess it's her subjective, like, image of her. But the thing that struck me was that I'm pretty sure that when she enters the hall at the end, it's the same dress as her wedding dress that she's been wearing the whole time. It's like a kind of almost premonition in some way. Maybe not a literal premonition, but like this looming image of her, as about to be married to this man. And I don't know, it felt like a very striking thing to me.
No, the tone is definitely, there's some times where it feels very surrealist. There are parts, actually, that reminded me, the film First Reformed.
Oh, yeah, great movie.
What it does, which I like in surrealist stuff, is it's mostly realist for most of the film, but then there's two scenes where it just kind of just gets really, really weird, and it's clearly not happening. So when that happens, it causes the surreality, if that's a word, to be just like that much more interesting, because you're lulled into the sense that it's a realist narrative until...
Yeah, it seems like... And First Reformed, that scene where they're floating...
That's what I mean, yeah. There's a scene where it's this really weird scene, too. It's like the priest is on the ground, and this woman who... I mean, spoiler alert for First Reformed, we'll probably cover it at some point, too.
Yeah.
But she's like, I used to do this game with my husband who died, where it's like we would lay on top of each other and just like stare at each other nose to nose. And so they do that, and then slowly they start to lift from the ground, and it's like they're flying over like mountains and trees, and then eventually it's like pollution and trash fires, but it just goes on, and it's just like, before that in the film, it's like ultra realist, like, you come upon a dead body, and it's like, oh god, it looks like it would.
Well, Paul Schrader, not to get too far off portrait, but he talks about transcendentalist style, and that, just sparingly using your more fantastical or dreamlike moments can make them that much more impactful in the narrative. Yeah. And with this film, there's nothing really else in the film like that shot of her burning and it makes that scene that much more like, you can see why it's seared into Marianne's memory, this kind of strikingly unusual image of her. I think everybody in the film, but there's so much silence, and Nomi Merlant and Adele Haenel just convey so much through just the way they look at each other and the way they move. It's amazing.
It's true, yeah. I mean, it's very... I hesitate to say it makes the film, because like it's a gorgeous film all throughout. The acting's like incredible. Yeah, and I've heard it's. I'm not an actor, but I've heard in terms of acting, not speaking is one of the hardest ways of acting because so much of emotion you can convey easily with tone and expression, but mainly like through voice and what you're saying. And when you don't have that, when you're just going off of facial expression, it's a lot harder, I think.
Well, there's that. So, going back to the lack of music, most of the movie is like almost like silent, like a silent film, even.
Yeah, like very silent. Actually, I took a note here that said, it's so beautiful, it could be a silent film. It wouldn't be as powerful, but it would still work on a level.
It would work. I think, I mean, my experience was, it was so quiet that in the theater I saw it in, you could literally hear the blasting music from the theater over, like, seeping in through the walls.
That sounds about right, yeah.
But it made me think about just more silent meditative moments are so undervalued in at least contemporary popular cinema today.
Well, yeah, because,
you need space to breathe,
Yeah, I mean, it depends what kind of film you're talking about, too. If you're talking about like a larger kind of popcorn blockbuster type film, like those have always been loud and sort of dumb.
Of course.
I mean, part of it, again, like how period pieces are kind of reflecting on the current times, a lot of cinematic styles and pacing are a reflection of the time. So when you find something like this, where it's like almost like a Kubrickian kind of like very deliberate scene and shot setup, and just like being willing to just show a person, and also not a lot of films will, telegraph. It's like if something's about to happen, they'll cut to a dog who's about to attack someone, or they'll cut to a fence someone's about to go through, but films like this, Portrait of a Lady on Fire, they're not necessarily telling you what you're supposed to be looking at all the time. Sometimes they're just showing you the whole tableau, and you are just gathering the information just wherever you see it.
Well, yeah, there are a lot of, I just noticed, there's multiple shots in the film where a character will say, come over here, and it won't cut to the person walking over. It'll just linger for like a solid 10 seconds as the person walks over.
Yeah.
This isn't really a film that you really see for the plot necessarily, I guess. Not...
No, I would disagree. You probably go into it knowing there's going to be a love story, so you know that at least.
And you can reasonably expect that.
Well, yeah, it's not like there's really any twists that come up that you couldn't have predicted from the outset. You know what I mean? It's not like oh my God, one of them, I don't know, turned out to be the sister who they said died. No, it's none of that. It's like, it's two women who fall in love.
Yeah, and it's... And
then one of them has to get married because, you knew at the beginning she had to get married.
There's no, the ending isn't a, even just knowing the period that these women were in, nobody's expecting them to ride off into the sunset together. But the way the film puts more emphasis on just the general, the mood of the house, and the one, I really liked these scenes where it's just extended shots of Marianne just painting and taking joy in the creation of a work of art. It's more about reflecting on what you're seeing than I guess actively being gripped by it or dragged through it or whatever.
Yeah, because it's also, they could have very easily done some revisionist stuff where it's like she paints the portrait of Eloise on fire, and it's like, oh my God, this painting's so amazing, and they have her be this huge really world-renowned artist, but they don't do that. It's like she still has to put her dad's name under her paintings to have them even seen. So it's very realist in that regard. But you still get this oddly ethereal kind of group of experiences between Eloise and Marianne. It's almost like when they get together, it's like reality is thinner because they're so in love that everything else just kind of melts away.
Yeah, they have this beautiful window of experience to just to realize their relationship with each other. That's, of course, cut short by the return of the mother. But you get the sense that despite the tragedy of the not again tragedy, but the loss of this romance that was never going to happen, they still cherish the experience, even though it never got to live past that window of time.
It's true. I do real briefly want to also mention the portrayal of men in this film. And by the way, don't get scared, everybody. I'm not going to do a men's rights thing. I love it because it's like the women are portrayed as like these beautiful and strange and like...
and intelligent.
Wonderful creatures. And then anytime they're intelligent, yes. And anytime there's a man, it's like they're like rowing the boat and the painting falls off that in the beginning, Marianne, or her canvas, and she like jumps off the boat to get it, and the dudes just kind of stare at her like, and then it's like at the very end when the man who's going to marry Eloise shows up, and this is highly metaphorical, but it's like you spent this whole movie watching this beautiful portrait be developed, and then what does he do? He's like, yeah, cool, and he just immediately hammers it into a box,
yeah,
so he can take it. And it's like, and then at the very near the end, when Marianne is in the gallery and she sees the painting of Eloise, she's just surrounded by all these old white dudes, and they're just sort of like sheep, just sort of hanging out, just like, oh, we're in the way. Like,
there was a great quote from the director where she says that when you see the guy from the boat show up again at the table, she walks downstairs and the guy's there and he's like, all right, let's go, with the painting. She wanted it to be almost like a kind of a jump scare moment.
It sort of was. You're like, oh, God damn it.
And that, like, the whole movie, you've just seen this woman developing this beautiful, like, not only the love story between Eloise and Marianne, but this community.
Yeah, the relationship with the maid, too.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden, there's just some guy sitting at the table. Yeah, just
some jackass shows up and he's like, hey, okay, I'm gonna go. Like,
it's like with no notion of the intensity of experience that these people have shared together. And it's almost darkly comedic, but
it is. I think it's meant to be a little bit darkly comedic. It's also meant to be
sad.
Sad. Yeah, because it's kind of like
there's. It reminded me a little of Martin Scorsese's The Age of Innocence, which is another great period romance.
I think I saw that. I have to go back and double check.
It's tied with Taxi Driver for my favorite of his films, but it concludes with another like pointless separation over the mores of a society at a certain time. But it reminded me in that when Eloise, Marianne comes downstairs and says goodbye to the mother, and then has to say goodbye to Eloise without even being able to express like a proper goodbye.
Yeah, because the mother, that's part of
it's so painful to watch.
It's really painful, yeah. When the mother's around, and the tone of the film shifts drastically, because in the beginning, part of the weird gothic feel is that this mother is sort of like, even when she's not there, perpetually sort of looming over their shoulders, because she's the one that hired Marianne, and she's like, I want my daughter's painting. And then when she paints one painting and destroys it, she's really mad at Marianne. She's like, you have to do this, like, so she's this sort of like authority figure, and perhaps represents like I guess a woman that would be more accommodating, like to the type of society they were in at the time, like you do what you're told, kind of.
Well, there's that conversation she has with the mother briefly, where she says the same thing happened to me, is that her portrait was painted and sent to a man she'd never met, and that when she arrived at the house, there was the portrait, already hung up on the wall.
That's right, yeah. And she was like, it was really odd, because I was like, who was that?
And there are like some surprisingly tender moments between Marianne and the mother that, you get the sense that the mother is a victim as well.
I mean, that's true. I don't want to... I guess I did sort of blanket portray her.
Oh, no, but she is still symbolic of the...
Yeah, she's symbolically representative of, like, the society that will not allow these two women to be in love. Because as soon as she leaves, that's when...
It's allowed to blossom.
Eloise and Marianne, like, that's when I feel like the film really actually begins.
Yeah, because they can... finally express their feelings for one another and, free of any constraint. And the girl...
Yeah, and then that's why, like, when she comes back, it's like you're back, and it's, like, just so much more painful, like, and yeah.
It's like a sinking in your stomach when she...
I know, because Marianne, all you can tell all she wants to do is run over and, like, kiss and hug Eloise, but she can't because her mom is right there. So she has to do this just very, like, prim and proper, like, hug while she's, like...
It's like a side hug, but you
she's not
see
even a full
that she...
frontal hug.
But she suddenly just lets out a little gasp at that moment.
Yeah, and then she just sort of runs off.
And it's so... It really just... It really hurts to see that type of you get the full weight of that loss in that moment, I think.
You do.
And then of course the following, like, Orpheus Eurydice thing that happens.
Yeah, I guess, like, wrapping it up, it's a brilliant film. It's beautiful to look at. It's this heartbreaking romance. It's really well written. I guess we haven't talked about the writing, but I think it's very well written.
Not a lot of dialogue, but when it comes, it's, like, meaningful and very, strong.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of filler dialogue. It's not like she's like, hey, how's it go? Like, there's none of that.
Everything they say is loaded.
Yeah, everything is loaded with meaning. And it's just a really, if I had, I guess, any negative thing to say about it, it's that it's clearly not for everyone because the pacing, I hesitate to say slow, but deliberate is what I think it is. It's because
yeah,
it's, I guess you could say it's a little slower at the beginning, but once the mother leaves, it speeds up a little bit.
The whole thing just like, it opens up and you start seeing all of these things that weren't, like the other woman, like the abortion plotline, all of these things that were concealed in the very, I guess deliberate is the right word, first half of the film just start to come to the fore.
It's very deliberate. And I would be remiss, by the way, I'm going to wrap this up pretty quick, but because we're getting near the hour mark, but I have to mention this shot because I'm a horror fan, so it takes a lot to shock me. And this, like, blew me away. So there's one of the scenes where the maid is having an abortion. On the bed she's laying on is a baby.
Yeah, two babies.
That is, like, two babies. And one of them is, like, directly in a shot where she's laying on her back and you know what's happening. And the baby's kind of, like holding her hand and, like, trying to comfort her. And it's just like, oh my God, like, wow.
It's just a...
But it's not, like, meant to be, like, a crass thing, but it's definitely, like, whoa.
But it's also so... Because you can see in the maid's expression...
That it's not like she necessarily wants to do this. It's like she doesn't really have a choice.
She can't... regardless of personal choice, in her position as a maid, she can't afford to have a child. But that doesn't mean she is completely divorced from children. Not that anyone reasonable would say that about women who have abortions, but there's this amazing tenderness between her and that child in that moment that is honestly unlike anything else I've seen on film.
It is, and it's like you think about it way more too because of what she's going through. Because, if she was just laying on a bed and the baby was kind of connecting with her, even if it was slightly before you knew she was getting rid of her child, it would be one thing. But this is an entirely different thing. This is like seeing a baby born at the same time you're seeing, like, a guy die. Like, not exact, but you know what I mean? There's that sort of sense of, like, of giving and taking.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, with this film, I think something that unique and valuable is worth the price of admission alone.
I think so. I really wouldn't. I'm sure this has already won stuff. I haven't done my due diligence. I haven't researched that much. But I'm sure if it hasn't won things, it will win things.
It's been kind of, it won a few of the smaller awards, I believe, but France didn't submit it for the Oscars. And to get into, I know we're coming to the end of this episode, but slightly more topical matters, there was an enormous storm of controversy.
Oh, the Polanski thing. That's right.
Yeah, which is, it really is terrible, honestly, to see a movie this rich and humane and humanist and all of that, be disregarded in favor of an actual monster of a human being.
It is, and I mean, even though it would be very hard to divorce yourself from that, if you can even separate art from artist, it's still a travesty that this wasn't submitted.
Yeah,
in any case.
This film is, I'm gonna, as I said at the cap, with Midsommar and Parasite, even only having seen it this morning, I would put this movie with my favorites of last year, and I think probably an all-timer, an all-time classic.
No, I think it's definitely a very powerful film. It was definitely one of my favorites that came out in 2019. But then, I mean, I obviously love Parasite and Midsommar too. I'm having trouble even remembering, like, I know Joker came out and I saw that because there was so much hoopla about it. And it's, I mean, this isn't a Joker episode. It's fine. I don't know. I don't want to even take a stance on it. It's just, it exists. I enjoyed it, but that's all I'm going to say. Like, I don't know that it deserved it. But anyway, yeah, like, I don't know. There was a lot of, I hesitate to say forgettable stuff, but like, I don't know. Nothing, there were a few films, like Parasite and Midsommar that really like stayed with me. But I don't know that there were that many.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird year for movies overall. Definitely some, I mean, to that list I would add, of course, Little Women, which I mentioned earlier, The Nightingale by Jennifer Kent.
I still want to see that, but it's been such a hard... I'd love to cover it at some point, but it's so hard to go into it because I know there's this really brutal rape scene in it.
There are mild spoiler warnings, but there are actually multiple extremely brutal rape scenes in that movie, and it is...
Yeah, so it's like when it's a Saturday night, and I'm like, hey, let's watch a movie. It's kind of a hard sell. It's like, well, what is it about? It's like slavery and terrible rape.
It's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to watch in a theater outside of Come and See.
I mean, it reminds me of so I'm a big Cary Fukunaga fan, right? And he has this, one of my favorite films of all time, Beasts of No Nation, which was one of the first Netflix films, actually.
No, I've heard of this. I haven't seen it.
And it's so good, but it's about African child soldiers, and it's so sad. So every time I tell someone, they're like, oh, cool, the guy that's the True Detective, what is it about? I'm like, African child soldiers, and their faces just drop. And I'm like, you're not going to watch this, are you? And they're like, what?